Hi, welcome to Swords to Plowshares, and I'm joined by my friend Chris today. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Craig.
And we're going to be talking about the Clementine Homilies and specifically the Table of Demons. So, what is the Table of Demons and what is the Clementine Homilies? So, first of all, just a little bit of introduction about what the Clementine Homilies are. This is an early text dating back to at least the 3rd century, likely earlier in some various form. And so it's a very early text and it's reasonably influential. There's a lot of people who talk about various forms of Peter's preachings, and this is the fullest, most extant early version that we have. And so scholars are kind of divided on what to make of it, how early is it, and so I think that it's very early. I think that it may or may not actually go back to the disciple Peter. I think if it doesn't, then it probably goes back to at least maybe one of his disciples. So I think that the stuff that's contained in here, even if maybe verbatim, they might not have been the things that Peter said. They may not have been, who knows? But I think that the ideas contained in it contain a lot of this early material that the early Jerusalem church, or these Ebionites, were teaching. Especially when it comes to various topics like the one we're going to talk about today, which is like eating animal flesh and its connection to demons. So, what do you know about the Clementine Homilies, Chris?
I think it's a good synopsis. I mean, in terms of dating, I've heard very varied accounts of how early or how late it could be. But I think 3rd century is roughly when most consensus dates it. But yeah, no, it is would be considered more Ebionite teaching, from my understanding, and that's usually what it gets lumped into, whether rightfully or wrongfully. That's just kind of the I don't know, yeah, what gets lumped into, I guess. So yeah, the tradition. That's what I'm looking for. The tradition it gets lumped into. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think based on the material contained within it, it's very clearly pushing against, or at least not consistent with, some of the views of the later proto-Orthodoxy or some of these Gnostic groups. It very much is in alignment with the teachings of James and the Jerusalem Church, which are considered the early Jewish Christians, is one term that's used. And it's also associated with a lot of the things that they're known for, which one of which is that they were practicing a diet that was not just what some other Jewish groups were practicing, where they would abstain from unclean meats and eat only clean meats. Here, they weren't eating any meats at all. They were completely vegetarian diet, and I think vegan diet. There's no record of them drinking milk and eating eggs or anything like that. And they were also in opposition to the animal sacrifices in the temple. So to me, that indicates that they were vegan, not just vegetarian. And so the Clementine literature definitely captures that aspect of the early Jerusalem church. So even if we want to say that the sort of Greek novelistic story of like Clement being united with his family, maybe that was sort of this later way in which this storyteller kind of wove together these earlier teachings, or whether you think it was all authentic anyway. The fact of the matter, from my perspective, is that the teachings that it contains do in fact date back to the Jerusalem church prior to the sort of proto-Orthodox takeover that sort of downplayed some of these aspects, including what we're talking about today. Does that sound fair to you?
Yeah, no, and I think I know some of your previous talks as well. You talk about like source text, and again, adding a story to it makes it more memorable. So maybe that's even why it could be elaboration on things that were said between Peter and Clement, and maybe it's made into a story or something like that as well. So.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I'd say let's jump in with this passage here. This is from 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 21, where Paul says, "You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too. You cannot have a part in both the Lord's table and the table of demons." So this is indicating to me that Paul had familiarity with this teaching that I think goes back to James and the Jerusalem church, that here is elaborated on much more thoroughly in the Clementine literature. And so this idea that you can't partake in the Lord's table and the table of demons, that they're you can't have one foot in one and one foot in the other, that you have to completely abstain from the table of demons in order to have part in the Lord's table. Now, the Lord's table is fellowship in the community of Christ, and it's marked by the sort of Eucharist meal of eating the bread, which represents Jesus's body, and the cup. You drink the cup, which is representing the new covenant, and his blood that was spilled. And so, whether it was water or grape juice or wine or whatever it was, this is the communal meal representing the community of Christ. And so, the table of demons was something that was irreconcilable with it. You couldn't be partaking in both. But then Paul, of course, doesn't elaborate very thoroughly on it. He kind of moves on to some separate but related points. But he does associate it with eating things that were associated with sacrifice. And so in the Clementine literature, it kind of goes into much more detail. So that's why I want to look at that here, so we get a better understanding of what this doctrine of the table of demons consists of. Do you have any thoughts on that Corinthians passage?
Yeah, I just find it interesting because he goes on to talk about sacrifice and stuff like that too, which it seems a little bit convoluted to me, that particular like this subsequent passages after verse 21 there. And even that, I've heard, like a book I was reading, it was actually about Marcion, and it was by Jason DeBoon, or Badoon. I think it's Badoon. I
Badoon,
was
yeah.
getting the syllables mixed up. And he talks about that, and he says even like some of the later passages in that might not even be original. Like he kind of takes maybe a more favorable view of Marcion, saying that no, there were verses that were added to it as opposed to verses taken away through that, and that might not even been, because he goes on and kind of to me it seems contradictory, the later passages, but that might be a separate issue you want to discuss. I don't know, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the reason Jason Badoon, he's a Marcion scholar, and one of the things that these top Marcion scholars are coming to a consensus on is that basically Irenaeus and Tertullian and all those who followed him basically had things backwards when it came to Marcion's canon. So Marcion had a shorter form of the Gospel of Luke and a shorter form of Paul's letters, which is called the Apostolicon, the canon of Paul's letters. They didn't have the pastorals, so those First Timothy, Second Timothy, and Titus. And there were some material in the other 10 letters that were basically later used by the Proto-Orthodoxy, that Marcion had sort of a shortened version of Paul's letters. And so they said that Marcion was cutting this stuff out. But now that we have a lot of the source texts that were used for the later construction of the Gospel of Luke, it was clear that Marcion's Gospel predates Luke, at least from my perspective, and I think from these Marcion scholars' perspectives. And so then the question is, well, does that mean that there were some things added to these letters of Paul?
Yeah. And then I guess a point of clarification too. I'm trying to rack my brain, but this is the only verse in the entire Bible that talks about the table of demons. Is that correct? Is there any other passages? I can't think of any.
This is the main one. Yeah.
Okay.
He talks about some things like associated with eating meat that was sold in the market, and there's this debate that's going on. This is clearly a big issue, like the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15, where they're focusing on, like, he says these 4 things don't do, and they're all related to eating meat and things strangled and abstaining from blood, and porneia, which is sometimes translated sexual immorality, but really it's the like infidelity or unfaithfulness to God that would be associated with doing things that are contrary to his will, especially worshiping idols, stuff like that. And then even in the Old Testament, idolatry itself was associated with eating animal sacrifices, or like the sin of Korah that's talked about in like Balak and Balaam. And then we get it in Revelation, where like the following Jezebel and the Nicolaitans who are eating meats offered to idols. So like this is an issue that's all throughout the Old Testament, all throughout the New Testament. It's in Paul's letters, but you're right; it doesn't go into a lot of the specifics. It just kind of alludes to it being an issue that's been prevalent for the whole biblical history. But the Clementine homilies go into more detail than anything anywhere else.
So, thank you for the clarification. Yeah, we can go right into the Clementine homilies if.
Okay. So what I did was I picked out a few. Now we probably won't have time to go through all of it today, so maybe we can meet up again another time to finish it. But I figure we could dive into it and get as far as we can. I picked out the passages in the homilies that address the issue in some form or another, so that if we got through all of it, then we would have a pretty good idea of what this doctrine is all about and all the things that are sort of directly related to it. So should we maybe take turns reading paragraphs? Does that sound good to you?
Sounds
maybe
good.
Talking about it in between?
Yeah.
Would you like to go first?
Sure thing. And do you want me to read the whole passage, or you want me to go sentence by sentence, or just the whole thing first?
Yeah, just read all of chapter 4.4, and then we can talk about it.
Sounds good. So chapter 4, Simon's doings. But Bernice, being asked, said, "These things are indeed as you have heard, and I will tell you other things respecting this same Simon, which perhaps you do not know. For he astonishes the whole city every day, by making specters and ghosts appear in the midst of the marketplace. And when he walks abroad, statues move, and many shadows go before him, which, he says, are souls of the dead. And many who attempted to prove him an impostor, he speedily reconciled to him. And afterwards, under pretense of a banquet, having slain an ox, and given them to eat of it, he infected them with various diseases, and subjected them to demons. And in a word, having injured many, and being supposed to be a god, he is both feared and honored."
So what do you get from that passage, from this chapter?
Yeah. This is Simon Magus. Is that who he's referring to? Just for context, is that?
Yeah, so the homilies and the recognitions as well, it's like Peter is sort of the main character and Simon is his opponent. And the Simon character is the one referred to in Acts chapter 8 as Simon Magus or Simon the Magician. Yep.
Yeah, no, I think the main point, especially for the purposes of our conversation, is that it's slaying the ox and giving them to eat it that get various diseases, and also subjected them to demon infestation, basically. So
Mm-hmm.
he's also performing, again, we're not supposed to be doing sorcery or tricks or things like that. I mean, that's another biblical injunction we're not supposed to be doing as well. So he's doing a lot of evil things, and looks like he might be talking to the dead as well, necromancy and all that stuff. So there seems to be a number of issues going on there, but yeah.
Yeah, and the specific thing, like you mentioned, that is connected here with the subjecting the people to demons. He says, having slain the ox and given them to eat of it, he infected them with various diseases and subjected them to demons. So he's basically sacrificing this ox and giving it to them to eat. So what do you do when you're sacrificing an animal? Well, you're sacrificing an animal to someone, to some god, some idol. And so you're sacrificing it to a god who accepts these blood sacrifices. And so when he gives it to them to eat it, they're eating this food that's been sacrificed. And as a result, they get infected with these diseases and subject to demons. So here he's connecting demonic possession to eating this meat that's been sacrificed. This
And
is a
just a
theme
point.
that we'll see throughout. But go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'll just say, and do you say like this was a sacrifice? Like, was the when he says slain in the bank, was that pertaining to a sacrificial action? Is that the understanding, or?
So that's my understanding of it, is that basically every time an animal is slaughtered, it is considered a sacrifice, whether it's, I guess, overtly, made such or not. And based on what's going on here, you're having this banquet where you're all getting together and you slaughter the ox and then you eat it, and it's like, well, that's kind of the whole idea of that, like that's what the ritual would be when you're sacrificing and eating the sacrifice. So like if we look at some of the context of what Paul's talking about when he says this, eating at the table of demons, he's saying like you're going into the temple and they're making the sacrifice and then you're all eating of it, and eating of it means you're part of that community that's worshiping that idol or that god. And so if you partake in the communion meal or the Eucharist meal or whatever you want to call it, where you're eating the body of Christ and you're part of Christ's community, like by eating it, you're announcing that you're part of this community. And so here by eating this ox that was slain, it's like you're part of Simon's community where you're going to eat this flesh and blood together. That's how I understand it.
That makes sense. And so actually, just kind of a general, what is this? Was this written in Greek, like the original? Do you know?
That's, I think, what they suspect is that it was originally written in Greek. Yeah, we have some in Latin, some in Greek. We have Rufinus, whatever his name is. I think he's the one who translated it from Greek to Latin. And this was, I think, in the 4th century when he did this, maybe the 5th century.
Okay. I'll just be curious to go back because I know even with the Bible, sometimes going back to an interlinear or a Greek dictionary, or lexicon or something, you can even often glean more. Like maybe the word slain there does mean sacrifice or something like that too. So I was just curious to go and dig more into that too. So.
Mm-hmm. All right. So do you have anything else to share about 4.4?
No, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I think, yeah.
All right, so I'll go next with the 7.4. This is where he talks about the golden rule. Wherefore, and by the way, since we're skipping around this, like trying to follow the story isn't going to make sense because we're skipping a bunch of stuff. We're just focusing on the ones that talk about the table of demons. So wherefore, as then you were deceived by the forerunner Simon, and so became dead in your souls to God, and were smitten in your bodies. So now, if you repent, as I said, and submit to those things which are well-pleasing to God, you may get new strength to your bodies and recover your soul's health. And the things which are well-pleasing to God are these: to pray to him, to ask from him, recognizing that he is the giver of all things, and gives with discriminating law, to abstain from the table of devils, not to taste dead flesh, not to touch blood, to be washed of all pollution, and the rest. In one word, as the God-fearing Jews have heard, do you also hear, and be of one mind in many bodies. Let each man be minded to do to his neighbor those good things he wishes for himself. You may all find out what is good by holding some such conversation as the following with yourselves. You would not like to be murdered, do not murder another man. You would not like your wife to be seduced by another, do not you commit adultery. You would not like any of your things to be stolen from you, steal nothing from another. And so, understanding by yourselves what is reasonable and doing it, you will become dear to God and will obtain healing. Otherwise, in the life which now is, your bodies will be tormented. In that which is to come, your souls will be punished. So here, that the tormenting, if you are doing the opposite, so the things that you do will come back to you. So you reap what you sow. And so if you're sowing these things like committing adultery against your neighbor, stealing from your neighbor, murdering your neighbor, then those things that you're sowing, you are going to reap. They're going to return on you, both in the judgment afterwards, but then you're also tormented in this life. And so some of these examples that he's giving of things that are pleasing to God that we're supposed to be doing, the one that's obviously relevant to what we're talking about today here, it says, to abstain from the table of devils, not to taste dead flesh, not to touch blood. So, what do you make of this this chapter here?
Yeah. Well, my first kind of thought was very Kantian, I guess, in terms of morality, so to speak. Although maybe this is a precursor to his beliefs, just like do unto others. And again, I would be curious to go through and whether it says like what murder means there. 'Cause sometimes murder just means to kill, and
Mm-hmm.
even neighbor again just means a dear one. So I mean, even that could have applications to animals as well. Or I mean, if something's dear to you, you wouldn't harm it either, whether it's an animal or a person. It could have
Mm-hmm.
application there as well. And again, especially when it talks specifically about not to taste dead flesh and not to touch blood. And I think those injunctions are there for our soul. I mean, again, to be washed from all pollution. If we're killing things, we
Mm-hmm.
are polluting our souls in that sense. So,
Right. And just for those who aren't clear, Immanuel Kant was a German philosopher who developed a moral system where he had the categorical imperative, which was basically the golden rule in a sort of philosophical framework. And so it was do those things that you would at the same time will to become a universal imperative. So, in other words, do only the things that you would want everyone to do, and which, do unto others as you would have them do unto you is basically amounts to the same thing. So, that's, I think, very clearly what he was focusing his system on. So, I agree, that's correct. And just to kind of reiterate here, this is something that, based on if you just read Paul's letters and this and Ebionite stuff, you kind of get both perspectives. Where just from Paul's letter, it's like he's sort of, it's clear that he's responding to someone. He's addressing groups. He's addressing perspectives, but you don't get the sort of dialogue. You only get Paul's side of the dialogue. And so, kind of seeing the other side of the dialogue here, you can kind of piece together what the disagreements might have been about. And so here, if you look at Paul's letters, he's saying, oh, well, the weak in faith, they eat only vegetables, but like we know an idol is nothing, but we should still abstain from meat in order to maintain fellowship with our brother, things like that. I will never again eat meat. And I follow the example of Christ, and, you should follow my example and abstain. So he's kind of giving this kind of almost roundabout way of arriving at the same conclusion that they should, not eat the meat. But he's kind of almost saying, well, not because the Jerusalem church is right. Well, we know we're the ones who are right, but let's still appease them. It's almost like he's saying that. So when I read this passage from like the Jerusalem church perspective, where they say abstain from the table of devils, do not taste dead flesh, do not touch blood, to be washed from all pollution. Well, that sounds like the result of the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15, right?
yeah, absolutely.
And so
I
they're
think
connecting it to this concept that Paul is talking about the table of the demons or table of devils.
think it also even connects to like in Acts when he confronts Peter about not having table fellowship with Gentiles. And I mean, especially subsequent sections here as well go into further detail of that. It kind of clarifies that concept as well a lot more too. So,
Yeah. The one time that Paul mentions Antioch. So Antioch's mentioned 16 times in Acts, but only twice in Paul's letters. One time it's in a list where he says, I was persecuted there. And then the other time is when he said, I confronted Cephas to his face about not having table fellowship with the Gentiles in Antioch. It's like, well, if you read the Clementine literature, he says that it's if you're not baptized and cleansed of all these things that you used to do, then you're demon possessed. And so I can't eat at the same table with you until you've been baptized and forsake and repent from all these demonic practices. And one of which would have been abstaining from tasting dead flesh and touching blood.
yeah.
So, how can somebody, let me ask you this question: how could somebody be eating animal flesh while holding to this instruction? or does this require someone to be vegan, in your opinion?
Yeah, no, definitely. At the very least, vegetarian. Like I said, I'm not entirely familiar with the rest of the literature, but as you said, I don't think there's any mention of milk or eggs in it. So it would at least be
Mhm.
vegetarian and quite likely vegan too, because yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so you don't think that this is just referring to cannibalism, right? Like, just don't taste the dead flesh of people, but you can taste the dead flesh of animals, right?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that is how a lot of people interpret uh, some other passages in Paul's letters. So,
Yeah. I think they're really grasping at straws there, though. So, but yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they should eat those straws like the ox.
That's right. That's right. Isaiah plug.
Yeah. All right. Do you have any other thoughts on this paragraph?
No, I don't think so.
All right. So, do you want to read 7.8?
Sure thing. The service of God's appointment. And this is the service he has appointed, to worship him only and trust only in the prophet of truth, and to be baptized for the remission of sins, and thus by this pure baptism to be born again unto God by saving water, to abstain from the table of devils, that is, from food offered to idols, from dead carcasses, from animals which have been suffocated or caught by wild beasts, and from blood, not to live any longer impurely, to wash after intercourse, that the women on their part should keep the law of purification, that all should be sober minded, given to good works, refraining from wrongdoing, looking for eternal life from the all powerful God, and asking with prayer and continual supplication that they may win it. Such was Peter's counsel to the men of Sidon also, and in few days many repented and believed, and were healed. And Peter, having founded a church, and set over it as bishop one of the elders who were with him, left Sidon.
So, it's something that stood out to you here.
Yes, the passage you have highlighted there, to abstain from the table of devils and food offered to idols and dead carcasses, which any animal flesh is a carcass in my mind. So I mean that would
Mhm.
prohibit, yeah. Which, yeah, and again from blood. I mean, it's pretty much impossible to remove blood from animals too. So
Mhm. Yeah, so again, there's this table of devils or this table of demons that's mentioned here, and it again associates it with these same concepts that we see in the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15, where it's like abstain from things strangled. Well, what does it say? From animals which have been suffocated, abstain from blood. Well, it says abstain from blood, abstain from food offered to idols. Well, that's food offered to idols. And then it's like, and dead carcasses, and to no longer live impurely. Well, again, what was the last thing? The porneia, which is often translate sexual immorality, but really this is it's live purely or have this fidelity to God. So this is exactly the same kind of thing, the same list. And so what basically the Jerusalem Council is saying to Paul is no, these Gentiles don't have to get circumcised, but they do have to abstain from the table of devils. That's how I interpret James's conclusion there in the Jerusalem Council. And so when he says this is an absolute requirement in order to be a Christian is you have to do this. Uh, and he's telling this to presumably to Paul, and he's saying you have to take a hard line on this when you're teaching this to the new converts. That this is the one thing we cannot compromise on. They don't have to get circumcised. We'll compromise on that. Only the Jewish people who are, have to get circumcised on the eighth day. But if these are adults, we don't have to circumcise them of the flesh. Just have, they have circumcised ears and hearts in that way. But they absolutely have to abstain from the table of devils. They have to stop doing these things. Is that how you would understand that?
yes, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, I don't know if it's like a misunderstanding between Paul, maybe the Jerusalem Council, or exactly how that all came about. That it seemed to be about circumcision, but it doesn't seem like it was about circumcision at all. and even these kind of rules or regulations, whatever you want to call them, or prohibitions, they kind of date back to no hide, like the no hide laws, no hide laws. So I think that's kind of where maybe they even get that from. So I mean, if they're going back to a pre-Israelite tradition for the Gentiles, that's kind of what they're going from. Like, this is like the bare minimum things you should be doing, and what was kind of given to Noah at the time following the flood and everything too. So they kind of drew inspiration from that. So yeah, we
Sure.
can turn our cameras off. It might be better for the bandwidth. And
Yeah, let's try that.
okay.
Okay. All right. So let's see. Chapter 7.8. Do you have any other thoughts on that chapter?
I think the only other thing I wanted to add too was that all should be sober minded, because it's often in the Bible it talks about alcohol and flesh eating together as well. And I found that an interesting, I guess, connection as well, back to the Bible. So
Yeah, and that's you're right that throughout the Old Testament it says don't be mixing with wine bibbers or riotous eaters of flesh. It says that, I believe, in Proverbs. And then even in Paul's letters, he connects the two. He says, like, don't eat the food that will cause you to beat on your brother, or like the drink the alcohol. So those things, like the one makes you violent, the other one makes you lack self-control. And
yeah,
so that you should abstain from flesh and alcohol. Like those are the two things that are morally questionable.
and I think even outright says in, was it First Corinthians 8, where he says, "I will not drink wine or eat flesh as long as it causes my brother to stumble." Is that the verse you're talking to about, or
Yeah, there's
okay.
the also the one about not eating things that are morally questionable. It's either First Corinthians 8 or First Corinthians 10.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's just, I thought that was an interesting connection because it ties it back in again, because it's all connected. I mean, it's kind of just general immorality, I guess, is that there. And again, like, it leads to lesser inhibitions and, yeah, more riotous living, so to speak, I guess. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so sober minded as well. Yep. All right. So let's see. Is it my turn again?
I think so. Yeah, and you're coming in much clearer now too. So I think maybe it's helping.
All right. So we're hiding our identities. Nobody knows what we look like. All right. The next one, we're skipping ahead to chapter 8.19. And again, we're in the Clementine Homilies. These things seem good to the all seeing God, that you lord it over no man, that you trouble no one, unless any one of his own accord subject himself to you, worshiping you, and sacrificing and pouring libations, and partaking of your table, or accomplishing anything else that they ought not, or shedding blood, or tasting dead flesh, or filling themselves with that which is torn of beasts, or that which is cut, or that which is strangled, or anything else that is unclean. But those who betake themselves to my law, you not only shall not touch, but shall also do honor to, and shall flee from their presence. For whatsoever shall please them, being just respecting you, that you shall be constrained to suffer. But if any of those who worship me go astray, either committing adultery, or practicing magic, or living impurely, or doing any other of the things which are not well pleasing to me, then they will have to suffer something at your hands, or those of others according to my order. But upon them, when they repent, I, judging of their repentance, whether it be worthy of pardon or not, shall give sentence. These things, therefore, ye ought to remember and to do, well knowing that not even your thoughts shall be able to be concealed from him. So, what did you make of this paragraph?
Um, just have a context. It's Peter speaking here, correct?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. I was just a little bit. I mean, obviously there's the thing about not shedding blood and all that stuff, but it just like it seems like is he allowing worship of people if it's for the like kind of the greater good? Is that kind of what I'm getting from that as well? Like that was my first impression, and I was a little bit confused about that. Maybe I'm misinterpreting that. Like if any of those who worship me go astray, is he talking about me being himself, or is he speaking on behalf of God there? That's just kind of where maybe I was a little bit confused about.
Okay, yeah, let me try to clear it up. So these things seem good to the all-seeing God, that you lord it over no man, that you trouble no one, unless any of his own accord subject himself to you, worshiping you, sacrificing and pouring libations, and partaking of your table. So the one he's talking to, I guess, would be Simon, saying, now Simon apparently had people worshiping him. So it's like they're worshiping. So this is clearly the one that we're not supposed to be doing, right?
Right. Yeah.
So this is the worshiping someone other than our loving creator, sacrificing and pouring libations. That's not something our creator wants. Partaking of your table. So these things that are associated with the table of devils. So it's partaking of, so he's talking about the devil or the demons, or accompanying anything else that they ought not, or shedding blood, or tasting dead flesh. So again, all these things associated with the table of demons, filling themselves with that which is torn of beasts, or that which is cut, or that which is strangled, or anything else that is unclean. So this would be the part about all the things that we're not supposed to be doing, that this would constitute the idolatry or the table of demons worship.
Right.
And then
No, of
he's,
course. Yeah. That part's very clear to me. That like what we're not supposed to be doing is very clear. But the latter section, I'm just like a little bit confused as to who he's talking about and why he's talking about that in that manner, I guess. So, yeah.
yeah, so let me check my notes in the actual homilies that I have. So let's see, we're in what chapter? We're in 8.19.
Does yours have notes? Your physical copy?
Yeah, when I read through it, I put a whole bunch of notes in it, and there's also multiple different versions. Like there's the Syriac and the recognitions and the homilies.
Nice.
So let's see, there's 19. Okay, so here this looks like it's kind of the homilies version of maybe the Ascents of James, where first he's talking about cannibalism, then he's talking about the flood, then he's talking about the law to the survivors of the flood, law to the giants or demons. So that's what this section is it's labeled the law to the giants or demons. So the partaking of the table, 1 Corinthians 10:21, which we've looked at. And then the sacrificing, saw that in 1 Enoch 19.1. There's a whole bunch of references. Let's see. So apparently these giants were, it says if we go back to chapter 15, so a few chapters, paragraphs earlier, says that these giants, not being pleased with purity of food, longed only after the taste of blood, wherefore they first tasted flesh. That's the 1 Enoch 7.5 reference. And so then now it's connecting that with the partaking of the table of demons in this paragraph.
Okay. Like I said, that part's all very clear. It has to make sense of that latter part about, like I said, but if any of those who worship me go astray, so like
Yeah, and so yeah, this is God talking.
it is God. Okay, okay.
Yeah,
Okay, that makes it clear then, because just yeah, I think the pronouns there keep changing, like because some points it's him, some points it's me, but I think that's why it is confusing to me. But
yeah, I think it's talking about like God versus worshiping the devil. So like if
right,
you're worshiping me, then you're not doing these things that are devil worship, and instead you're doing these pure things that follow.
okay,
Does it make more
right.
sense now?
I think so. Yeah, like I said, this goes from first person to third person at the end there, because even your thoughts shall not be able to be concealed from him, and then it goes back to the third person. I think that's why it was confusing to me. But anyway, that does make sense. It's the only way to me would make sense that Peter's saying any of that. So yeah, because I think at one point even Acts he says, "No, I'm just a man," doesn't he? At one point when somebody falls at his feet and tries to worship him or something.
Yeah, it
So
says, see that you do not do that. I know it says that
yeah,
in Revelation as well.
yeah,
It's like,
so,
someone who has the same testimony worship Jesus or worship God.
yeah. No, I think that clarifies. But like I said, I mean, the prohibitions are very clear and everything, and said not doing any other things which are not well pleasing to me, which again is sexual immorality and idolatry. Again, it could be another term for idolatry and bloodshed and everything like that. So
Mhm.
that's all very clear. So yeah,
Yeah, so I think the one of the things I wanted to really reiterate here is that these connections of like this group of things is something that comes up again and again. And
mm,
so whenever we see these come up or like partial lists of these things come up in different contexts, that would clue us in to know this is the subject that they're talking about. It's the table of demons. So, like
mm,
you said, Paul, I think, only mentions the table of demons explicitly, maybe this one time, but he talks about these kinds of these lists of things come up in various forms, like in over a dozen places in the New Testament and many places in the Old Testament as well. So this would help us clue us in to, okay, this is the subject that's being discussed here.
right. Yeah, that makes sense.
And so one question that someone might have, if let's say they're one of the people who says, no, 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 all they were saying was that we needed to basically keep all the laws of Leviticus, like that was their message. It's like, well, if you think about all of these requirements, and we think about what might they all pertain to and what might they not pertain to. So the first part here where it's sacrificing and pouring libations. So sacrificing, well, do you sacrifice animals or do you sacrifice vegetables? Well, you can, I guess, offer a grain offering, but you're sacrificing an animal.
Yeah,
Partaking of your table, accomplishing anything that they ought not, shedding blood. Well, unless it's a blood orange, you're you're talking about animal bloodshed or bloodshed of your children. There's human sacrifices are part of this. Our humans are also blood. Tasting dead flesh. Well, I don't think it's talking about dead coconut flesh. I think it's animal flesh.
yeah,
Filling yourselves with that which is torn of beasts. Like, are you saying that the beasts tore up the corn and you're eating the corn? No, it's like animals are tearing up animals, or that which is cut, that which is strangled. Do you strangle a carrot? No, you strangle an animal, or anything that is unclean. Oh, so just the unclean animals, but you can eat the blood and the strangled flesh of the clean animals? No, it's saying all this is unclean. This is impure. These are the things of the table of demons. So that's what makes them unclean are these things. So you're eating this flesh and blood of animals, which is what the the giants were doing that gave rise to the destruction of the world with the flood. So he's like, don't do those things that are of the corruption and the violence. That's how I understand this. How do you understand it?
yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, the pouring libations. I mean, that's another reference to alcohol. Libations would be a drink offering of some sort, usually wine. So you see the flesh and consumption and alcohol together there as well. But even like I said, you can't get any clearer than just shedding blood. You can't, like anytime
Mhm.
you kill an animal, you are shedding blood. Like, I mean, that's what you're doing when you slit an animal's throat. I mean, that's what you're doing. And then again, there's
Mhm.
prohibitions about strangling them. So I mean, even if you do it another way, you're still violating prohibitions that God has put in place. So there's no way to get
Mhm.
around those very obvious verses there in my mind. So
Yeah, you might be able to get around like half of them if you finagle it the right way, but then you can't get around all of them. And I think that's part of the genius of talking about the same thing in a dozen different ways and putting it together in this list like this is
mhm.
that if you're going to try to find some loophole to allow yourself to still be able to do this thing that it's telling you not to do, then you have to find like 12 loopholes in order to do it, not just one.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And just to add further to what you were saying about the pouring libations, well, you're right, it would often refer to the wine, and the wine would represent the blood. And so, in a quite literal sense, there's all these passages throughout the Old Testament where they're sprinkling blood on the altar. And so they're pouring out the blood as an offering to God, and they're covering the altar with blood, and they're burning the animal as a whole burnt offering on the altar. And so, this eating flesh and drinking blood, well, you're offering this flesh and blood to God to eat and drink as well. So you're sacrificing the flesh and pouring out the blood libation so that God can eat flesh and drink blood just like you. God's like, no, actually, that's what the demons are craving. And if you are craving those things, you are following the demons. They're possessing you to crave these things that they crave. This is the opposite of what God desires. Does that sound right
Ab-
to you?
Absolutely. I know. Amen. Yeah.
Let's see, if you read through the prophets, which I know you have, they have this recurring message of God does not want animal sacrifices. Get these out of here. And
Yes.
Jesus disrupting the temple is quoting those passages.
That's right.
I,
Yes,
I
exactly.
desire mercy, not sacrifice.
I was going to even say too that there is some passages where the term sacrifice is used, and when you actually dig into the interlinear, it actually just denotes incense offering. So sometimes it does, but I mean, from the context, you can tell in this case it's talking about
Mhm.
animal sacrifices. But there are some times where there was just purely incense, and again, it could be frankincense, myrrh, maybe
Mhm.
whatever. Um, so I mean, maybe those are some. I know in some other. Maybe even in the Clementine writings too, it talks about like pure libate, like pure offerings, and maybe that's what they were referencing. It was like something like that too.
Mhm.
Like those are the sacrifices that are God are wanting, kind of thing. Because you kind of even see that in Revelation too, where they're pouring incense, censers and all that stuff out and all that stuff, and you kind of see that mingling with prayer. And so I mean, maybe that's
Yeah.
something different entirely, but there is times where it is again a different type of offering, and that's probably what God would be more pleased with, to be to be perfectly honest. So yeah,
Mhm. Yeah, and like you said, and it does connect it with prayer. So like the prayer is what's offered up. So like if you think of burning incense or burning an animal, that like the smoke goes up and it rises to the heavens. And so when you pray, your prayer goes up to the heavens. Your prayer goes up to God. And so that's what we should be doing is we should be praying to God, not serving the desires of our flesh to do things that are contrary to the will of God.
absolutely.
It's like, well, I desire these things, so I'm sure God desires them. It's like, well, you only desire them because a demon is possessing you and causing you to desire them. But it's going
That's
to
right.
leave you dead in the grave of craving.
Absolutely.
So, any other thoughts on this passage?
No, no. Like I said, I think it's very clear. Like I said, and again, kind of going back to Paul, though, I mean, yeah, it's kind of going the spirit of the law versus letter of the law. If you want to get through all these loopholes, the letter of the law kills. The spirit of the law, though, it brings life. So that's kind of what we're getting to there, I think, as well. So
Mm-hmm. So, is it your turn now?
it is, yeah, it's my turn. So this is section 8, chapter 20, and the title is Willing Captives. Having charged them to this effect, the angel departed. But you are still ignorant of this law, that every one who worships demons, or sacrifices to them, or partakes with them of their table, shall become subject to them, and receive all punishment from them, as being under wicked lords. And you who, on account of ignorance of this law, have been corrupted beside their altars, and have been satiated with food offered to them, and have come under their power, and do not know how you have been in every way injured in respect of your bodies. But you ought to know that the demons have no power over anyone, unless first he be their table companion, since not even their chief can do anything contrary to the law imposed upon them by God. Wherefore he has no power over anyone who does not worship him. But neither can anyone receive from them any of the things that he wishes, nor in anything be hurt by them, as you may learn from the following statement.
I'm headed out. See you later, man.
Sorry, sounds like there was a background noise on Craig's end there.
Sorry about that. I had a friend who was visiting.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, and I found this one really willing. I mean, it talks specifically about free will. Like, we have the free will to either choose God ways, and that brings, I guess, angelic, like good angels as opposed to fallen angels, or we have the choice of choosing the opposite, and that brings demonic possession, basically. And again, and table fellowship. So again, what we eat is extremely important. And again, eating through the entire Bible is very important. I mean, what we eat is extremely important to God. Like, the very first prohibitions were about what we should eat and what we should not eat. So, I mean, it's something that, again, that is part of worshiping God.
Yeah. That's right. The one negative prohibition after the flood, the one negative command is, do not eat flesh with its blood, because the blood is the life. And in the beginning, it was, do not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In the days that you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will know good and evil, and you will surely die.
Yep.
So it's like it's been there as the one thing that we should not do. Just like in the New Testament with the Jerusalem Council, it's like, okay, you don't need circumcision. That's not as important. This is the one thing that you don't do. You do not open yourself up to demonic possession. We have been saved from that, and you can't participate in salvation and demonic possession.
That's right. Well, and even when Eve ate from that whatever, I say an apple, but whatever the forbidden fruit was, you see that as fellowship with Satan. Satan was there, the one tempting her and doing that. So I mean, that is table fellowship with demons, basically. So you see it right from the very beginning and all throughout Scripture. So
there's two things that stood out to me about this. This first part that I have highlighted: partakes with them of their table, shall become subject to them, and receive all punishment from them, as being under wicked lords. Anyone who on account of ignorance of this law have been corrupted besides their altars, been satiated with the food offered to them, have come under their power. Yeah. So it's like a willingness thing where you think, oh, well, I worship God. I don't worship demons. So I don't have to worry about this. But the things that it's describing as emblematic of what that worship is, it's not just like bowing down and singing praise to them, singing worship music to the names of demons. Like, that's not what it's talking about here. It's saying, if you choose to do these things that they're enticing you to do, to eat the food at their table, that's what gives them that power over you. Yeah. That you're choosing them over God's divine protection.
Yeah. And again,
so this is the.
I think it goes right back to the very beginning, like you said, with you're choosing the knowledge of evil. Basically, it could have been the good and maybe emphasizing the evil, and they chose the evil. They chose the demonic forces to fellowship with, as opposed to God's.
So the other part of this passage that stood out to me: but you ought to know that the demons have no power over anyone. Full stop. Unless first he be their table companion. That's why this is such an important thing. And this is why Cephas was like, no, Paul, like, this is really important. And James is like, Paul, this is the one thing you cannot allow them to do. So they have no power over you unless you're their table companion, since not even their chief, who's their chief? Satan,
Yeah.
can do anything contrary to the law imposed upon them by God. Wherefore, he has no power over anyone who does not worship him. So the way he's calling us to worship him is through table companionship with him, eating the things that he wants us to eat, which is the flesh and the blood. Those are the things that are the forms of worship of Satan. And he says, he has no power over you if you're not worshiping him in this way. So this like refusing to be part of this table of the demons and instead being a part of the table of the Lord, that's the only way to avoid this demonic possession. Is that what you got from that?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I was reminded of Job too. I mean, it sounds like, again, Satan kind of like in Job, he kind of allows Satan to do things, but kind of for his own purposes as well, in an indirect way. But he only what got within God's parameters, and that's kind of what I got even from that passage too. Like even they have laws they have to abide by, and yeah, I found that interesting. So,
Mm-hmm. Oops. Yeah.
I saw a pop up there. Is it?
Yeah, I was. I thought there was a comment, but it was StreamYard telling me. Anyway,
No, okay.
if anybody does have a comment, you want to ask it, I can pop it up on the screen. But looks like we don't have anyone. So, is there anything else about this paragraph that stood out to you?
No, like I said, I think it's pretty clear. I said, yeah, we have to worship them, and yeah. And again, just the fellowship. Again, and it's like, again, you either take like the sacrament from Jesus and God, or you take the sacrament from the demons, and that's basically, again, there's a very like stark dichotomy there. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it's like this is the one thing you can't do, and the one thing you need to do. So if you're going to boil it all down to one thing, then James had it exactly right. This is the most important thing.
That's right.
All right. So let's see.
Did I read the last one? I can't remember now. Is it my turn to read again, or is it?
I don't know.
I can't remember.
Do you want to go?
Sure. Yeah, I can go again. So this is just still section. Oh, sorry, we're section 9:9, right?
9:9. Yep.
No. Okay. Yeah. Okay. How demons get power over men. Since, on the other hand, you are oppressed by strange sufferings inflicted by demons, on your removal from the body you shall have your souls also punished forever. Not indeed by God's inflicting vengeance, but because such is the judgment of evil deeds. For the demons, having power by means of the food given to them, are admitted into your bodies by your own hands, and lying hid there for a long time, they become blended with your souls. And through the carelessness of those who think not, or even wish not to help themselves, upon the dissolution of their bodies, their souls, being united to the demon, are of necessity borne by it into whatever places it pleases. And what is most terrible of all, when at the end of all things the demon is first consigned to the purifying fire, the soul which is mixed with it, under the necessity of being horribly punished, and the demon of being pleased. For the soul, being made of light, and not capable of bearing the heterogeneous flame of fire, is tortured, but the demon, being in the substance of his own kind, is greatly pleased, becoming a strong chain of the soul that he has swallowed up.
So what do you make of this paragraph?
It's pretty scary, I think, to some extent, but I think it's, again, going back to what Paul talks about, though, like we're going to have that purifying fire, and it's going to burn away. I mean, it's going to be a painful process if we have demons attached to us, but I mean, it's going to burn them away, and That's kind of what I get from that, at least. But I mean, again, it does talk about that we only have, like, it has to be the food given to them. So there's that,
Mhm.
again, that table fellowship that they needed to have to be admitted into our bodies. So
Right. So it's like their own makeup is, I guess, fire, whatever that spiritual fire looks like, but our makeup is different. And so it's like if we're burning in a fire, that's one of the most painful things that you can experience. Whereas if the demon is composed of fire, they're like, yeah, I'm like swimming in a jacuzzi here. Like this is my element.
yeah.
And if we read the book of Enoch, which I think the early church was very influenced by the book of Enoch, and in that it talks about how this eating flesh and drinking blood is something that the giants were doing, and that the when the giants died in this flood, their disembodied spirits lived on, and that's what the demons are. So there's fallen angels which went into the daughters of men to produce the giants. So a fallen angel has their own body. They have this heavenly body that they could, I guess, transform into human bodies or whatever other bodies they want. They have their own body. But these spirits, these demonic sort of disembodied spirits, they do not have their own body. They have to possess the body of a human or an animal.
Mm.
And so, like an angel could presumably like just eat food. It says manna is their food. They can eat because they have their own bodies. But a demon cannot eat. So a demon needs to possess like a human body in order to experience that. So they're like, I want to eat flesh and drink blood. So I'm going to possess this person to kill an animal and eat the flesh and the blood. And I want them to worship me as a god by giving these things to me, by offering these animal sacrifices on the altar and pouring out the blood on the altar, so that you're giving flesh and blood for me to eat as your god, but then you yourself are also eating. So we're eating together at this table of demons, of eating the flesh and drinking the blood, which is the exact antithesis of what the table of Christ is.
Mm.
Jesus says, eat my flesh, drink my blood, and that's through the bread and the water, or the bread and which, whether it's water turned to wine, whatever it is,
Mm.
but it's not the flesh and the blood. So we're abstaining from that table to eat at the Lord's table. And here it says, for demons having power by means of the food given to them are admitted into your bodies by your own hands. So it's not like, oh, I got possessed by a demon, I downloaded a virus, something like that. No, this is like you invite them into your house, and you do this by eating at their table.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it goes back to the previous passage in section 8 there. Like, we are the ones who willingly accept them by doing things that are contrary to God's wishes. So, and I think subsequent passage we'll probably read, I think probably near the end, it talks about, yeah, like as you were saying, how demons wanted to experience those lusts of the flesh. So that's why they need to basically possess somebody more. I don't know, possess it. I don't know if this is one word I can come up with, but possess somebody to be able to experience those lusts that they want to take part in. So
That's right. Anything else about this paragraph stood out to you?
Yeah, no, I think that it's everything all the thoughts I had on it, but yeah, it's scary, the thought that it could become blended with your souls. I mean, I guess that's, yeah.
And really, that's a good point. Maybe we should say something about that too. A lot of people, they don't recognize that when you're worshiping these demons, even unbeknownst to yourself, you could be singing praises to the Lord and worshiping demons at the same time. And Jesus says, if you those who say to me, Lord, Lord, and do not do the things that I ask, he's going to say, I never knew you, you who practice lawlessness. He's like, you're not sitting at my table. I don't know you. Like, you're sitting at the table of demons. You can call me Lord, Lord all you want. But if you're not sitting at my table, you're not part of me. And so this is like a really important teaching that's so overlooked by the church. And I think that this goes back to even the second century, with like the takeover of these original teachings and kind of turning it into its opposite and making this not an issue. Is like, look, this is, we can't sit at both tables. And people who think, oh, well, I can't give up my meat, or I can't give up my cheese, or like, I can't give up these things. It's like, well, is that really you who's talking? You who's created in the image and likeness of God? No, that's the demon speaking. And like, you're so attached to that being you, and those are your desires, and this is what you want, that the desires of the demon that's possessing you, you think are your own desires. You think you are that demon.
Yeah. And yeah, I think you talk about that again in subsequent sections as well. How again, sometimes they even lay latent for years. I mean, they say, yeah, just waiting for their time to worm its way into your mind that, oh, I want you to lust for that thing or whatever it is, whether it be meat, flesh, wine, sexual immorality, idolatry, it doesn't matter. I mean, there's so many ways to be idolatrous. I mean, screens are a prime example. I mean, yeah, we're looking down at our screens instead of looking up and worshiping God like most people are. So, I mean, there's so many ways that, I mean, they just kind of subtly attract people to them in various ways. So, yeah,
But the one that seems to be front and center stage is this eating flesh and drinking blood.
absolutely, yeah,
That's the one that's mentioned in multiple different ways throughout each of the passages associated with the table of demons.
100%. And again, like when God said the wages of sin is death,
Mm-hmm.
again, that killing animals is death. That is a sin. If that if that is so, death is not a good thing to God. That is like the ultimate
Mm-hmm.
thing that's probably evil to God's eyes. Like he's the author of life, not the author of death. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Paul says we need to die to the flesh, that the flesh is contrary to the spirit, and that when we die to the flesh, we crucify that flesh, and we're reborn of the Spirit of God. He says it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. So if it's Christ who lives in you, it's not Christ who's lusting after these things. It's not Christ who's trying to participate at the table of demons. So if that's not your identity, if your identity isn't Christ, then you're not living on the you're not eating at the table of Christ. And if your identity is to do these things that are what the demons are wanting you to do, then you're identifying with the demons, not with Christ.
that's right. Absolutely.
All right. Anything else about that one?
No, I think I said everything I wanted to say on that one. That's
All right. Next up is 9.10. And here we have a few that are in a row. So I don't think we're going to have enough time to make it through the whole thing. But the just to let you know that like 9:9, and then now we're in 9:10. So this is actually the next one, because this is like a longer section where he talks about it in more detail.
yeah. This one's a little
So,
more hopeful.
okay.
Yeah.
9.10. But the reason why the demons delight in entering into men's bodies is this: being spirits and having desires after meats and drinks and sexual pleasures, but not being able to partake of these by reason of their being spirits and wanting organs fitted for their enjoyment, they enter into the bodies of men, in order that, getting organs to minister to them, they may obtain the things that they wish, whether it be meat by means of men's teeth, or sexual pleasure by means of men's members. Hence, in order to the putting of demons to flight, the most useful help is abstinence and fasting and suffering of affliction. For if they enter into men's bodies for the sake of sharing pleasures, it is manifest that they are put to flight by suffering. But inasmuch as some, being of a more malignant kind, remain by the body that is undergoing punishment, though they are punished with it, therefore it is needful to have recourse to God by prayers and petitions, refraining from every occasion of impurity, that the hand of God may touch him for his cure, as being pure and faithful. So what made this hopeful to you?
There's a way to remove them, and it's basically like as Jesus said. I mean, and Paul as well. I mean, um, like abstinence, fasting, and suffering of affliction. I mean, we're supposed to crucify ourselves, as you just said as well. I mean, if we do that, I mean, clearly there's going to be some maybe higher level demons, I guess you want to call them that are going to maybe try to stick with you through that. But for the most part, most of them will be expelled by doing that. So.
Mhm. I think it's interesting. Like in addition to kind of telling us what the flight, what the solution is to like not allow them to do these things. Basically, it says that the reason that they're doing this is what I alluded to when we were talking about the Enoch, and I was explaining what the metaphysics is, like the difference between a fallen angel and a demon. So it says the demons delight in entering men's bodies because being spirits, having desires after meats and drinks and sexual pleasures, but not being able to partake of these things by reason of their being spirits. That's exactly what I was just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so they basically have to possess you to do these things on their behalf. And so when we think of like who am I representing? Who is my Lord? Who is my King? Well, if your Lord is the Lord Jesus Christ, then that Lord is not going to be guiding you into these things. Like if your Lord is guiding you into these things, it's not Jesus who's your Lord. And so if you are desiring the meats, you're desiring to drink blood, you're desiring to delight in these things that are the tables of demons, whether it's meat by men's teeth. Well, what happened in Numbers 11? It says, while the meat was still in their teeth before it was even chewed, a great plague struck them and they died in the grave of craving. Kibrath Hatava. And so we don't want to be dying in that grave of craving by desiring that meat and allowing that demonic possession into our lives. And so the way around it is to abstain from those things, to say, I'm going to forsake the table of demons. I am going to give it up once and for all. I am going to take a stand against it. I do not want this demonic activity in my life. So you stand against it, you abstain from it. That's what he says. It says to abstain, right? That was the advice. Abstinence, fasting. What are you fasting from? You're fasting from this animal flesh. You're doing the Daniel fast. You're eating the vegetables and the water instead of the alcohol and the animal flesh and the blood, and you're suffering affliction. Well, you might think, oh, I really desire this hamburger. Oh, I really desire these things that are the table of demons. Well, all right, like that's, you'd rather be suffering the breaking away from that possession than suffering the possession, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like withdrawal, basically. That's kind of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
It's like
It's
you're
an addiction
detaching
almost.
yourself from them.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Do you have anything else to say about this one?
Again, I'd be curious to go back because I mean, I'm assuming meat here means flesh, like animal flesh.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I have to go back, I guess, the original language, but sometimes older terms can mean just meat, but it does mean flesh in this verse, I presume.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's no, like I said, it's very clear whether it be like flesh. I mean, by men's teeth. I mean, you can't. Yeah.
So just to clarify, and that it's good that you mentioned this here, that when we're giving the longer exposition, we have that list where it's like things strangled, things offered to idols, things shed blood, things, it's describing animal flesh in all these different ways. And now, when it's only kind of mentioning it more succinctly, in order to make a slightly different point, it just says meat. So it's like, well, that's what we're talking about is meat, this animal flesh. And so that is like the main focus of what they're talking about here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do we have time to maybe do another paragraph, or do we want to
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah. Maybe one
just
more, and yeah, put about an hour and a half. That'd probably be a good place to end it. I don't know how long you want to go with this, but
yeah,
that works for
I think
me.
that's a good time. That's I think that's about the time frame that works for both of us, right?
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. So whose turn is it now?
Yeah, I think it's my turn. I think
Okay.
you read the last one. So we're still in section 9, and this time chapter 11, and it's unbelief, the demon's stronghold. But it is necessary in our prayers to acknowledge that we have had no recourse to God, and to bear witness, not to the apathy, but to the slowness of the demon. For all things are done to the believer, nothing to the unbeliever. Therefore, the demons themselves, knowing the amount of faith of those whom they take possession, measure their stay proportionately. Whether they stay permanently with the unbelieving, tarry for a while with the weak in faith, but with those who thoroughly believe and who do good, they cannot remain even for a moment. For the soul being turned by faith, as it were, into the nature of water, quenches the demon as a spark of fire. The labor, therefore, of every one is to be solicitous about the putting to the flight of his own demon. For being mixed up with men's souls, they suggest to every one's mind desires after what things they please, in order that they may neglect his salvation. Yeah, it's a hopeful
So this one's,
passage.
yeah, I was about to say another kind of more hopeful spin on things.
Yeah.
A little bit more hopeful than the you'll be burned and chained to them, and they'll be glorifying in it. You'll be tormented.
That's right.
So this is the path that we're supposed to be choosing. So what do you make of this this part about like this water quenches the demons and their spark of fire?
I mean, again, that's definitely referring to living water in my estimation there, and my interpretation. If we cling to God, that's, again, it says those who believe thoroughly and who do, and I think even kind of importantly, who do good as well. I mean, you can't just believe, as James says. I mean, what is belief without action? Basically, they
Is
cannot
dead.
remain even for a moment. I mean, it's just, I mean, the demons, and I think James even mentions that too. Like, if is it James that mentions that? If you, I can't
Says
remember what.
even the demons believe.
Yeah, but there's I can't remember the passage now. I'm trying to mind blank, but there's a passage about that. Like, if you ask the demon, like, yeah, kind of like the "get behind me, Satan" thing. But I can't remember the passage now. So I'm drawing a mind blank, so it might come back to me for next time. But I can't think of how the passage. I can't even paraphrase it right now. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think that this water is referring to the waters of baptism as well. So we are reborn of the water and the spirit. So just like in the beginning of Genesis 1:2, it says that the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And so when we are baptized into that spirit that's hovering over the waters, we come up out of the waters. And now we are reborn a new creation. We are a child of God. We are in the image of God. And so we are cleansed of this demonic activity, this demonic possession. And so this putting water on the fiery demons quenches them, puts them out, it puts them to flight. And here it says, the labor, therefore, of everyone is to be solicitous or diligent about the putting to flight of his own demon. So this is sort of our responsibility, that we need to take this seriously and not just be like, oh, well, I, prayed about it and that didn't happen, or like, oh, it's, it's on my list of things to do, or I don't know, I think I have permission, I'm going to ignore this. I don't think it's important. I'm saved by grace anyway, even if I, eat at the table of demons. Paul only mentions it once. So like, I'm going to ignore this. I think those are the wrong attitudes to have. I think we need to take this seriously and say, I'm going to be diligent. I'm going to be solicitous about putting to flight these demons because I want nothing to do with them. I want everything to do with Christ and his table and nothing to do with these demons and devils in their table. Yeah. What do you think about that?
Absolutely, and I think I remember the passage. It wasn't any of the apostles. It was actually Jesus who said, because I think it was the part where the apostles couldn't remove a demon from somebody, and he said some demons can only be removed by prayer and fasting. And again, that shows the faith aspect of it, but also shows the fasting aspect of it, which again is the good works, and as well as how they're expelled. So you see that even with that as well. And Jesus mentions that, like, there's some demons that are so powerful that's the only way to overcome them is through faith and abstinence of the things that the demons want. So
and so I think that's I think that's from the Gospel of Mark. I know the Gospel of Mark is the one that's like all about, Jesus is the exorcist, basically, where it's like all he's doing is exorcising demons left and right. And so that's like if we understand what this crux of demonic possession is, it's eating at their table. And that's a form of worshiping them when we're eating at their table. And what is on their table? On their table is flesh and blood. That's it. Like that's their table. It's the flesh and the blood. So if we completely abstain from that flesh and blood, we follow the example of Daniel. We do the very good thing that he gave us to do in Genesis 1. We follow the example of all the apostles and all these extra biblical sources where it says they were all vegan and abstaining from these things and teaching these things. And this whole Ebionite tradition, this is a main theme for them that we see carryovers of this in Paul's letters and in the Gospels and in James and throughout the Clementine literature, especially, where this is a really important concept. And I think it really needs to be highlighted that this is a very important thing, that we shouldn't just read through Acts 15, the Jerusalem Council, and say, oh, yeah, we're not supposed to do those things. Like those have been nailed to the cross. What? No, like this is after the cross. This is
Yeah.
the Jerusalem Council. And are you saying that they're wrong? That I'm not going to listen to James. I'm going to listen to Jesus. All right, listen to Jesus. This is what Jesus put James in charge. And he said, heaven and earth came into being because of him. Like, listen to James. He's the one who knows what he's talking about. And here we have it, I guess, from Peter, or I guess from Clement, from Peter, from Jesus. But it's the same idea here, is that we need to really put these demons to flight, and not just do so only through the prayer, but also through the fasting. And we want to fast from the flesh and the blood. That's the fast.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that's exactly how I interpret that passage. And again, and the previous passage as well. I mean, it all just blends in really well together. And also, again, there's so many connections to the canonical scripture as well. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that's probably a good place to stop. Maybe we could pick up on this maybe next week or sometime whenever we're both available.
Sounds good. Yeah, no, I'll double check for next week, but the same time should work for me too. So,
okay. Do you have any thoughts about maybe all the things that we talked about today and like the Clementine literature? And do you think that it sounds like you're in agreement that these things are the right things to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely elaborates on a lot of those things. Again, it's kind of like Enoch elaborating on what happened during the flood, and what like the precursor that was with the eating of the flesh and the blood and the giants and the fallen and the demons, fallen angels or demons. So again, I really like these kind of I don't know what to call them, but like extra canonical works that elaborate on those things. I really enjoy them. So I think they add a lot of clarity to some things that maybe, I think the canonical scriptures are very clear, but I mean, I think this really hammers it home, so to speak. So,
and I guess the technical term here is homily, which is basically a sermon. So these are the Clementine homilies, meaning they're the sermons of Peter that were recorded by his disciple Clement. And if you believe that this is a recounting of what actually happened, then this would be Clement of Rome, who is the second archbishop behind Peter, the Church of Rome. And so that's what the tradition is suggesting. And we know that this is a source that's at least from the first couple of centuries. Maybe the end of the second century would be kind of the latest date, because we start having clear attestations of it shortly thereafter. And I think that this material, we could talk about this maybe next time, I think that this shows a clear predecessor to some of the various schools of thought that arose in the second century. So this to me indicates that this is probably a very early text, but that's neither here nor there. But the main point, I think, is that it's preserving some of these early traditions that directly go back to James and the Jerusalem church, which means it directly goes back to Jesus because those were his immediate followers. So I think that these teachings are very significant, and that's why we see smatterings of them throughout all the canonical texts. And so I think, like you said, looking into these texts that give us a deeper understanding of them, some of these things that have been later obscured by the various proto-Orthodox traditions, and wanting to kind of make this not a central theme where it was clearly a central theme at the time of the Jerusalem Council.
Yeah.
So let's bring this back to being a major theme.
Absolutely. I guess one other kind of, I don't know, inkling in the back of my mind, so to speak, is you kind of see it throughout. I mean, like we started with Paul, and I mean, there's clearly some disagreements there between him and the, maybe, I don't know, disagreements, maybe misunderstandings would be a more neutral term, between him and the Jerusalem Council. And this is maybe something we can bring in when we discuss it further next time. But like, what was I going to say with this? I was going somewhere with this, and now I've lost my train of thought by getting the preamble in there.
Something about maybe Paul teaching something slightly different,
Yeah,
or
I
to
guess
what
that's
extent he's teaching
kind
the
of
same thing.
well, and it's well, that's part of it. So kind of Paul teaches something different, and I remember what it was. But at one point, and again, a lot of people who are against Paul will put the charge up against him that, well, he was admittedly demon possessed. Like he said at one point, that one of his works, he said he was demon possessed. I'm just curious to know what your thoughts on that are. Maybe we could tackle that subject next time we discuss. It's something that's kind of in the back of my mind, because he says after he was sent, like, I mean, it was him that was talking about going to the
The
third heaven.
thorn
I
in
think
his
he was,
side.
yeah, and then he had a thorn in his side, and it was basically said it to be a demon possession. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on that and what that means about, again, all this stuff, and maybe his faith. I don't know. It's just kind of an inkling thought, and in the back of my mind there and all that. So yeah.
Yeah, that is a longer discussion, and I do have some thoughts on that. My short answer is that I think he's not demon possessed. I think that what is going on is there's Satan is sending a person who's demon possessed, who's basically harassing him. So when he says he's tormented by this demon that Satan, that Satan has basically brought to him, I think he has a literal person who's demonically possessed that's harassing him, and this person is not leaving him alone. That's my interpretation. But we can talk about that also more later. But I guess just the main thing for today is just that this material of eating at the table of demons is the exact opposite of eating at the table of the Lord, and that front and center, the stuff that's on this table is blood and flesh. And the thing that we're being called to do is to abstain from those things and to refuse to be part of this table of demons, and instead be washed, be cleansed, and instead eat at the table of the Lord.
Amen.
Does that sound right to you?
That sounds perfect. Yeah, perfect conclusion. So yeah.
All right, so I guess we'll join again next week at the same time. So if you want to join us, feel free to ask questions too if anyone wants to join us live. So it'll be my time is 5 p.m. Pacific, Saturday. So that's 9 p.m. New Brunswick time. So whatever that translates to, if anyone wants to join us.
Atlantic time. Yes. Yeah.
Atlantic. Okay. Yeah. New Brunswick time. All right. Atlantic time.
Atlantic time. Yeah. Atlantic's, well, I think Atlantic daylight now is what we're in. So
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much,